prodigal sons. Sorry. Paul Robeson died on January 23, 1976 at 77. Following year, the actor James Earl Jones, who had appeared in both Jean Gannett's The Blacks and Lorraine Hansberry's Les Blancs, was asked to appear in a play based on Robeson's life and accepted. Paul Robeson, in his final incarnation, turned out to be a two-act play written by Philip Hayes Dean and directed by Lloyd Richards. It described Robeson's development from childhood through his singing and stage successes, his activism, and his persecution. The play toured the country to mixed reviews. Robeson's son opposed the production. As Jones recalls, at virtually every performance of the play in every part of the country, he would encounter Paul Jr. outside the theater. As a result of his disapproval, the production was unable to use recordings of Robeson's voice or any of the materials controlled by the Robeson estate. This resistance reached its peak in January 1978 with the publication of a two-page advertisement in Variety just before the play's scheduled opening on Broadway, titled A Statement of Conscience. This quote, open letter to the entertainment industry, stated, shortly the play Paul Robeson will open on Broadway. We, the undersigned members of the black community, having seen the production and read versions in progress, regretfully feel compelled to take the extraordinary step of alerting all concerned citizens to what we believe, however unintended, a pernicious perversion of the essence of Paul Robeson. In the body of the text, Robeson's achievements were noted as well as his commitments. Quote, Robeson believed that this art and his being were inseparable from his race and his politics, and he adamantly insisted on using his great gifts as a revolutionary instrument in the case of the liberation of the blacks of America and of Africa and the oppressed of all nations. End quote. Acknowledging that, quote, we cannot in this brief statement begin to establish the total dimensions of the man, end quote. The statement discussed outlines of the American government's persecution of Robeson, the economic deprivation, the denial of passport privileges, the efforts to expunge him from the historical record, to create a, quote, non-person, end quote. The play itself was characterized as a rewriting of history, as perverse in its way as the original attempt to erase history, a tissue of invention and distortions ranging from the most elementary facts of the man's youth aspirations and development, of the role of his father, his brothers, his wife, to the simplest chronological events of his life and career, all presumably in the effort to create, quote, acceptable, end quote, motivation to soften the genuine ones, end quote. Although the play itself was seen as problematic, Jones's acting was praised. Quote, we make this statement despite the fact that the magnificent acting of James Earl Jones elevates the portrait to sympathetic and commanding levels. There will be many persons unknowing of the true dimensions of Robinson or the full extent of what was done to him, who may be grateful for what is given, but it is precisely here that the greatest danger lies. For we in the black community have repeatedly seen the giants among us reduced from revolutionary, heroic dimensions to manageable, sentimentalized size. If they cannot be co opted in life, it is simple enough to tailor the images in death. End quote. The ad was sponsored by the National Ad Hoc Community Information to End Crimes Against Robinson. Among the signatures were Alvin Ailey, Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, then City Councilman Marion Barry, Law Professor Derek Bell, Ebenezer Lerone Bennett Jr., then Georgia State Senator Julian Bond, historian John Bracy, activist Ilombi Brath, Gwendolyn Brooks, playwright Alice Childress, John Henry Clark, playwright Leon Elder III, Nikki Giovanni, Edward Connier, novelist Rosa Guy, political scientist Charles Hamilton, Matt Jones, and Ronald Walters, John O. Kellins, Coretta Scott King, Paulie Marshall, Alvin Toussaint, members of Congress John Conyers and Charles Rangel, poet Quincy Thorpe, Coleman Young, by this point mayor of Detroit, and Paul Robeson Jr. Sorry. Baldwin, who had struggled to get support for this movie script detailing the life and times of Malcolm X, wrote a separate piece in the Village Voice explaining his displeasure with the Robeson production. He acknowledged that he had not yet witnessed a performance of the play, but contended that he could still judge the production as, quote, plays are read and judged. Yeah, yeah. Hold on, guys. Hold on. Call. Oh my God, where's this phone? Oh. Nobody not on it, Sam. Nobody not on the phone. Sam. All right, my friend. No, I'm not very reading some words. Some words, some words, not read. You come inside. If you come inside, I gotta be quiet. I gotta be quiet. Yes or no?
Yes.
All right. I apologize. First, an officer. Hello. 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 How are you? Happy New Year. This is Mr. Birch's son. Who is this, please? What? Oh, hold on, Ambi. Hold on, Ambi. Hold on. Ambi, sir.
Hello, I'm doing it. Came to there. Thank you, thank you. Everything all right? Yeah. Okay. I'm doing all right. We're in the community, you know. Okay. I got me. Thankful.
Son. Hang up. Continue.
Yeah.
Pass it, sir. Ring it up. Pass it, sir. Ring it up properly. Pass the phone, sir. Ring up the phone properly. Hold on. All right. Take that. Shh. He acknowledged that he had not yet witnessed a performance of the play, but contended that he could still judge the production as, quote, plays are read and judged, seen in the mind's eye, long before they are produced. Indeed, this is how they are produced. End quote. Noting, because Richard Hayton, noting the ironic dimensions of the campaign, given the concerted effort to silence Robinson, the activists, despite the First Amendment. Baldwin argued, quote, it is tempting to dismiss the Robeson ad hoc committee as an, quote, on black activities committee, end quote. But this is inaccurate and unfair. The accusation is not supported either by the tone or the language of the committee's statement. This statement was, after all, drawn up by writers, and every writer loathes and distrusts this sort of controversy. I hope I do not have to say that no one wishes to burn the script and no one is willing to stone the writer. We have all been stoned too often. End quote. In common with many of the play's critics, he praised Jones's acting abilities, recognizing that if one reads the play knowing that James Earl Jones is going to play Paul Robeson, one can almost feel electricity with which Jones will fill the theater. The Jones incandescence would beautifully transform the script. End quote. Finally, he highlighted what he felt was the inaccurate and inappropriate rendering of Robeson's career and significance, and lamented, quote, the trivialization of Robeson, end quote, and the debasement of his legacy, end quote. At the end of the statement, he asserted, the man the play presents is not Paul Robeson. That is all that we are saying. There is much, much more than this to say. For this controversy raises enormous questions, questions within questions of life versus entertainment. Oh, sorry. Life versus art. The awakening or sleeping of wearing responsibilities. Oh, sorry. With which we will be struggling until we die. Yet, at the moment, it must be said, this man is not Paul Robeson. We must say this. Since we are here, we are living, and we knew him. End quote. James Earl Jones himself had been frustrated with the aspects of the play's second act, particularly that he sensed was a lack of coherence in the material. Nevertheless, he was generally satisfied with the production, did a good job of representing Robinson, a man he admired. Indeed, he had long standing personal reasons to be committed to portraying Robinson accurately. His father, Robert Earl Jones, an acquaintance of Robinson, and a stage actor, had been called to testify before HUAC and subsequently blacklisted. As the Sun would recall in his autobiography, open quote, he had been called up because of his involvement with the leftist movement in the late 1930s, end quote. At the same time, his father's experience made the younger Jones wary of political activism. Quote, I was aware that when the army was doing my security clearance in 1953, I had not been declared guilty by association because Robert Earl had not raised me. From that time on, I did not want to be political. When I met Robert Earl in New York, we talked only briefly about politics. We agreed that the less I knew about the past activities, the better. I did not know whether he was a communist or not. He denied that in public. I did not want to know anything that would require me to compromise myself. End quote. Jones also argued that the work of an actor should be distinguished from political concerns. Open quote. I believe the profession of being an actor should transcend the politics and the social order of the times, end quote, he wrote, adding later, I have never been an activist, end quote. He also cited Robinson's own words in defense of the play. In an essay Robinson wrote for the National Urban League's journal Opportunity in 1924, in response to critics of his appearance in Eugene O'Neill's All God's Children, he asserted that blacks were, quote, too self-conscious, too afraid of showing all phases of our life, especially those phases which are of greatest dramatic value, end quote. Moreover, proposed Jones, some of the individuals who lent their names to the protest against the play did so because they were seeking to quote, make amends end quote, for having insufficiently supported Robeson during his lifetime. And the play and the quote play became the vehicle for their expiation. End quote. What expiation means, sir?
Right from
Expiation.
explanation. Explanation.
Expiation for their. uh, Guys, if you know what expiation mean, type it in the comments. No, I'm not telling people them say if you know what expiation mean, you type it in the comment.
Comment.
Finally, Jones questioned the legitimacy and character of some of the protesters in reference to a public forum that was held to discuss the play at Hunter College in New York in March 1978, which he attended with his father. Jones chided Baldwin for being an absentee race man and Ozzie Davis, another participant whom he suspected as one of the ringleaders of the protest. The debate regarding Paul Robeson also raised the question of the relationship between form and political content. While Jones, Richard, Dean, and undoubtedly others were seeking to create a moving drama about one particular and obviously quite remarkable individual. There was also the issue of whether the theatre and drama constituted the most appropriate way to engage Robeson's sorry, legacy, especially so soon after his death. As with issues such as slavery and personalities such as Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., the dramatic urge arguably works against the political narrowly understood, given its focus on the individual and the sentimental in ways, or more accurately, to a degree that, for example, the documentary form does not, as Paul Robeson Jr. and the other supporters of the protests contended. Jones's skill as an actor could be seen as increasing the possibility that audiences would engage the character of Paul Robeson minus deeper political significance of his times. Robinson himself was reported to have preferred to have his story conveyed in the form of, quote, a documentary with authentic footage, end quote. The most interesting aspect of the protests and the advertising campaign against the play was the characterization of Robison's significance. The, quote, open letter to the entertainment industry, end quote, characterizes Robinson almost solely in racial terms as a race man, to use the canonical term. Besides one brief reference to the quote, oppressed and exploited of all nations, end quote, there was no hint to the text that Robinson might have a scientific socialist, that he might have been supportive of the labor movement in the United States and abroad, that he was at the very least a, quote, fellow traveler, end quote, and an avid promoter of the Soviet Union in the West and elsewhere. The ad copy refers to, quote, the creation of a non person while marginalizing important aspects of Robison's work and commitments. So, the there, sir.
Mm.
The implicit suggestion seems to be that a heroic Robinson, as as usable text, sorry, for the post civil rights era, would have to be stripped of his complexity and separated from the full scope of his ambitions and projects. In this light, it is useful to consider the significance of the fact that the signatures for the protest campaign were all black. More to the point, later the same year, the Executive Council of the Dramatists Guild would issue a press release criticizing group censorship and the campaign against the play Paul Robeson. Among individuals signing this declaration were Paddy Chayefsky, Jules Pfeiffer, Terence McNally, John Garr, Lillian Hellman, Arthur Miller, Stefan Sondheim, Jules Stein, and Betty Comden. None of the individuals supporting this position were of color. The racial divide that characterized the debate about the play underscored in some respects the way the articulations of broader political positions have inevitably been racialized and illustrated the distance traveled since the late 1940s with regard to the kinds of challenges the Popular Front posed to the American status quo and the sorts of constraints placed on the black artist activist. As mentioned earlier, Robeson emphasized the racial angle of his protest activities in the late 1950s. Sorry. And he sought to reestablish his credentials among African Americans. Those efforts, though never erased his commitment to labor, the left, and internationalism. In contrast, the late 1970s debate about his legacy suggested that it was already only as a raceman that Robinson could be engaged, effectively completing the dismembering and disarticulation that had occurred during the Cold War. For instance, in his comments on the play in the Afro American, Samuel F. Yeti argues that the controversy around Robinson, the individual in the play, was a question of maintaining manhood. Quote, but the essence of this great and versatile man, of our own society, has sought to separate him from his manhood, and manhood from his people are not from the record subject to honest and reasonable doubt. The conspiracy against Robinson was to separate him from his natural powers, from his manhood. End quote. Come, if Robinson was to be ret- re- re- retrieved and made useful, if he was to be revered and recuperated, it would have to be in terms that replicated this articulation of race and class, black politics and internationalism, while treading safer waters of manhood rights. Robeson then, as political infratext, would in the decades after his death function as a raceman containable with the borders of a postage stamp and of disclosures that, in many respects, avoided political chapter 3. 40 minutes, sir. Read that. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Love you. Bye. Ciao. Richard Iton. In search of the Black Fantastic.
Why?